Today we're reading from the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, text number 11. This verse may sound familiar. The Sanskrit to the verse is Vedanti tattva vidas, tattvam yajnanam advayam, rameti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdyate. Does anybody know what any of the word meanings are? They say. Yeah, the sages who know the categories properly. There are many categorical mistakes one might make. Like I might think I'm this body, but I'm not. I'm a different category of energy. And what else? Tat is what? Something you're able to point to and say this has a definable characteristic, and this is one of the ways that we talked about the Vishnu Purana, the Bhagavad-gītā, the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam gives these clear definitions of categories of energy, and that's important to know, because you may then make a category mistake by saying I'm God, but you're not. You're a tatasta. You're a fragment of God, a part of God. So that could be a mistake. Or identifying with material energy could be a mistake. So the tattvadarshis are those who have clarified these categories. And that this verse talks about three major categories, which are Brahman and Bhagavan. And here's the translation. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. The absolute truth is both subject and object, and there is no qualitative difference there. Therefore, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upanishads, as localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagavan by the devotees. In other words, Bhagavan, or the personality of Godhead, is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation of the personality of Godhead, and impersonal Brahman is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun god. Less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization. But those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features of the one absolute truth are different perspective views seen from different angles of vision. As it is explained in the first shloka of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, the supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known. But in the absolute truth, both the knower and the known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower is the living spirit or superior energy, whereas the known is inert matter or inferior energy. Therefore, there is a duality of inferior and superior energy, whereas in the absolute realm, both the knower and the known are of the same superior energy. There are three kinds of energies of the supreme energetic. There is no difference between the energy and the energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The absolute realm and the living entities are of the same superior energy, but the material world is inferior energy. The living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusioned, thinking he belongs to the inferior energy. Therefore, there is the sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything there is absolute. I offer my respectful obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, all the previous acharyas who have given us this illuminating knowledge, and to all the assembled devotees. Vanchakalptaruscha kripasinabhevacha Patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. As to the matter of Brahman, we have in the Brahma Samhita, Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Koti Kotishva Shesha Vasudhadi Vibhuti Binam Tad Brahma Nishkalamanantam Shesha Bhutam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. As Brahma explains, because of the presence of the Brahman, there's a way that there are varieties of manifestations all over the Lord's creation. And Prabhupada, in a explanation of this, not in the Brahma Samhita, but elsewhere, quoting the verse, tells how when the sun comes, there are varieties of manifestations within our world. Let's say God's green earth. For instance, we may notice, you may notice, you may not notice, depends what climate you live in, but in California we notice there's a very short winter. And when the sun increases in duration each day, which happens after the winter solstice, the plants start coming back noticeably. Even 1 extra minute, and they start coming out again. The irises in my backyard, they go, okay, time to come back out again. And there's a creative way in which the sun encourages everyone and infuses them with energy so that they can manifest their potential. And similarly, the Brahman energy of the Lord, which is all-pervasive, it sustains, maintains the various varieties in the different creations around the world, which is indicated in the verse, Yasya Prabha Prabhapato Jagananda Koti Kotishvashesha, the millions and billions of universes. And we find in the last verse of the Brahma Samhita, where Kṛṣṇa is telling Brahma that I'm infusing you with, as the translation says there, with this fiery energy by which you can create the various elements and forms of this world. And then we have Paramatma. And of course, as we mentioned before, and it's worth mentioning again, the Brahman has a source. Just as the rays of the sun, which are synonymous with the Brahman effulgence, have a source. Kṛṣṇa is the source of the Brahman. Kṛṣṇa says, Brahmano hi pratishtaham amritasya vayasya cha shashvatasya chatarmasya sukhasya ikantikasya cha. That the Brahman effulgence comes from me. So we can again invoke the analogy of the sun. You look at the sun, there's a sun circle, and inside it there's a sun god, and from the sun god the fiery energy known as the sunlight emanates, and from Kṛṣṇa the effulgence, the Brahman effulgence emanates. So he's the source of it. That's where it's coming from. Then Paramatma. Here in the purport, Prabhupada says that according to our perspective, there's a way in which we may see the various features of God, and there may be ways, different ways that one may organize one's life to be aware of these various features. For instance, Prabhupada mentions the Hiranyagarbhas, or the, who else did he say? No, that's for the Paramatma. Those who realize Brahman may study the Upanishads, come to this awareness of the all-pervasive energy of the Lord maintaining everything. And then we have the Hiranyagarbhas, or the yogis, who may become aware of Paramatma within the heart. And in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada also gives us a practical way of realizing the Paramatma, as he says, for any ordinary person. And then a logical way in which we can understand Bhagavan, because Bhagavan can only be seen through bhakti. And bhaktyamam abhijananti yavanyaschasmi tattvataha tato mam tattvato gyatva vishite taranantaram. There's only one way to enter into bhakti, and that's through love for Kṛṣṇa. Mutual exchange of love between Kṛṣṇa and the devotee. Paramatma realization, well, that may seem difficult, but Prabhupada makes it easy. And I'll read to you from the second canto, second chapter, 35th verse, the ways in which he describes how we can experience Paramatma for ourselves. Would you like to do that? Yes. I'm not convinced. Yes. All right. The verse goes like this. Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu lakshita sarvan swatmana hari. Bhagavan sarvabhuteshu lakshita swatmana hari. Drishyar buddhyadi bir drashta lakshaner anumapakai. Now here comes some heavy hearing. Are you ready for some heavy hearing? Yes. The name of Sutta Goswami was Ugrashrava. Ugra means like Ugra Nishringa, fierce. And Shrava means he heard. So you got to be Ugrashrava now. Because this is going to be really heavy hearing. You ready? Yes. All right. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Kṛṣṇa, is in every living being along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. The general argument of the common man is that since the Lord is not visible to our eyes, how can one either surrender unto him or render transcendental loving service unto him? To such a common man, here is a practical suggestion given by Srila Shukadeva Goswami as to how one can perceive the Supreme Lord by reason and perception. Actually, the Lord is not perceivable by our present materialized senses, but when one is convinced of the presence of the Lord by a practical service attitude, there is a revelation by the Lord's mercy, and such a pure devotee of the Lord can perceive the Lord's presence always and everywhere. He can perceive that intelligence is the form direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. The presence of Paramatma in everyone's company is not very difficult to realize even for the common man. The procedure is as follows. One can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. He may not feel it very abruptly, but by using a little intelligence, he can feel that he is not the body. He can feel that the hand, the leg, the head, the hair, and the limbs are all his bodily parts and parcels. But as such, the hand, the leg, the head, etc., cannot be identified with his self. Therefore, just by using intelligence, he can distinguish and separate his self from other things that he sees. So the natural conclusion is that the living being, either man or beast, is the seer, and he sees besides himself all other things. So there is a difference between the seer and the seen. Now, by a little use of intelligence, we can also readily agree that the living being who sees the things beyond himself by ordinary vision has no power to see or to move independently. All our ordinary actions and perceptions depend on various forms of energy supplied to us by nature in various combinations. Our senses of perception and of action, that is to say, our 5 perceptive senses of 1, hearing, 2, touch, 3, sight, 4, taste, and 5, smell, as well as our 5 senses of action, namely 1, hands, 2, legs, 3, speech, 4, evacuation organs, and 5, reproductive organs, and also our 3 subtle senses, namely 1, mind, 2, intelligence, and 3, ego, 13 senses in all, are supplied to us by various arrangements of gross or subtle forms of natural energy. And it is equally evident that our objects of perception are nothing but the products of the inexhaustible permutations and combinations of the forms taken by natural energy. As this conclusively proves that the ordinary living being has no independent power of perception or of motion, And as we undoubtedly feel our existence being conditioned by nature's energy, we conclude that he who sees is spirit, and that the senses as well as the objects of perception are material. The spiritual quality of the seer is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of materially conditioned existence. That is the difference between matter and spirit. There are some less intelligent arguments that matter develops the power of seeing and moving as a certain organic development, but such an argument cannot be accepted because there is no experimental evidence that matter has anywhere produced a living entity. Trust no future, however pleasant. Idle talks regarding future development of matter into spirit are actually foolish because no matter has ever developed the power of seeing or moving in any part of the world. Therefore, it is definite that matter and spirit are two different identities, and this conclusion is arrived at by the use of intelligence. Now we come to the point that the things which are seen by a little use of intelligence cannot be animate unless we accept someone as the user of or director of the intelligence. Intelligence gives one direction like some higher authority, and the living being cannot see or move or eat or do anything without the use of intelligence. When one fails to take advantage of intelligence, he becomes a deranged man. And so a living being is dependent on intelligence or the direction of a superior being. Such intelligence is all-pervading. Every living being has this intelligence, and this intelligence, being the direction of some higher authority, is just like a father giving direction to his son. The higher authority, who is present and residing within every individual living being, is the super self. At this point in our investigation, we may consider the following question. On the one hand, we realize that all our perceptions and activities are conditioned by arrangements of material nature, yet we also ordinarily feel and say, I am perceiving, or I am doing. Therefore, we can say that our material senses of perception and action are moving because we are identifying the self with the material body, and that the superior principle of the super self is guiding and supplying us according to our desire. By taking advantage of the guidance of the super self in the form of intelligence, we can either continue to study and to put into practice our conclusion that I am not this body, or we can choose to remain in the false material identification, fancying ourselves to be the possessors and doers. Our freedom consists in orienting our desire either toward the ignorant material conception or the true spiritual conception. We can easily attain to the true spiritual conception by recognizing the super self, Paramatma, to be our friend and guide. And by dovetailing our intelligence with the superior intelligence of Paramatma. The super self and the individual self are both spirit, and therefore the super self and the individual self are both qualitatively one and distinct from matter. But the super self and the individual self cannot be on an equal level because the super self gives direction or supplies intelligence, and the individual self follows the direction, and thus actions are performed properly. The individual is completely dependent on the direction of the super self because in every step the individual self follows the direction of the super self in the matter of seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, willing, etc. So far as common sense is concerned, we come to the conclusion that there are three identities, namely matter, spirit, and superspirit. What are the three identities? Now if we go to the Bhagavad-gītā or the Vedic intelligence, we can further understand that all three identities, namely matter, individual spirit, and the superspirit, are all dependent on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The super self is a partial representation or plenary portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Bhagavad-gītā affirms that the Supreme Personality of Godhead dominates all over the material world by his partial representation only. God is great, and he cannot be simply an ordered supplier of the individual selves. Therefore, the super self cannot be a full representation of the Supreme Self, Purushottam. Realization of the super self by the individual self is the beginning of self-realization. And by the progress of such self-realization, one is able to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by intelligence, by the help of authorized scriptures, and principally by the grace of the Lord. The Bhagavad-gītā is the preliminary conception of the personality of Godhead Sri Kṛṣṇa, and Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam is the further explanation of the science of Godhead. So if we stick to our determination and pray for the mercy of the director of intelligence, sitting within the same bodily tree, like a bird sitting with another bird, as explained in the Upanishads, certainly the purport of the revealed information in the Vedas becomes clear to our vision, and there is no difficulty in realizing the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva. The intelligent man, therefore, after many births of such use of intelligence, surrenders himself at the lotus feet of Vasudeva, as confirmed by the Bhagavad-gītā 7:19. Now you can applaud. Go ahead. Let loose. Very good. Bravissimo. So, do you have any reflection or question from that? Yes. Go ahead.
This conversation reminded me of this section in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad-gītā, where Lord Kṛṣṇa talks about dvāmo purusha loke ksharascha akshara evacha. And then finally, yomam evam asammudho janati purushottamam sa sarvavid bhajati mam sarvabhavena bharata. So this concept of this pursuit of knowledge should ultimately lead to that point that we know there is Purushottam Jagannath, the Lord, and we can serve him, we can connect with him and form that relationship again which we have lost or forgotten. And iti guhyatamam shastram edamuktam mayanaka etat buddha buddhiman syat kritakrityascha bharata. So that's the perfection of intelligence also, to understand that there is a person behind all of this. That person is the Lord Kṛṣṇa.
Thank you. Nice citation. Well done. Yes. We'll bring you the mic in 7 seconds or less, or your money back.
Hare Krishna. A part of the reading in the purport reminded me of your class last night, when you were talking about, how people develop their own religions and their own philosophy. And because last night I was thinking of the law of attraction, and in my mind I was thinking, yeah, but that's just Maya tricking them. They're getting what they desire. And in the purport he says that he's supplying us according to our desire. And so everything is still emanating from the personality of Godhead, but they think it's emanating from something else.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Nice observation. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Thank you for that reading. It was so wonderful. I was just thinking that I have a free will. It's such a big fallacy because of its sheer minuscule quality, or quantity rather. And Prabhupada clearly says that matter, spirit, and super spirit, all three are dominated by Bhagavan. So at every moment, all our actions, all our choices are also dominated by material nature. We are in the modes of material nature. So what free will are we talking about? But whatever little free will that we have, when we have something which is so valuable and we have it in small quantity, we should treasure it, we should cherish it. But in this material world, all we are doing is misusing it, rather abusing it. And then Prabhupada was saying that we have the similar nature as the Supreme, we are spirit soul. But then we see all the time people actually go to matter to find happiness and peace in there. And so we have intoxication and this and that. I mean, a man would not go to a dog or a tiger for a consultation if they have a problem. They'll go to another man because they have the same nature and they know that this is where I'm going to get some intelligence. But because of our avidya, we really don't know that we need to turn to super spirit and then to Bhagavan in order to get that intelligence for guidance. So just thinking of this.
Yes, in the Bhagavad-gītā, Kṛṣṇa says, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasya ahaṅkāra vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Then a counterpart to that verse, counterbalance. Tatvavittu mahā-bāho gunakarma vibhagayo gunagunishu vartanta iti matva nasajjate. Although one is easily bewildered by the power of the material nature, to the degree that one thinks that I'm doing everything. And Kṛṣṇa says this is the illusion of the soul. Tattvavittu mahā-bāho gunakarma vibhago. When one becomes tattvavit, which relates to today's verse, Vedanti tattvavidas, one's making a category mistake again, and so one has to become tattvavit. Vit means the knower of something. And you have to know, put the categories in the right order, and don't step in it, in the wrong category and become swallowed by it. Therefore, it's important, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told Sanatana Goswami, Maya Mugda Jivara Nahi Swata Kṛṣṇa Gyan, Jivara Kripaya Koila Kṛṣṇa Veda Puran. There's a all-out effort coming from the spiritual world and the Lord and his devotees there. They have a major campaign that's ongoing to intervene in the ignorance of the soul in the material world. And that's what that verse means. Maya mugda jira nahi swata Kṛṣṇa. It's not automatic that a soul, as you were alluding to, would come out of the ignorance in the material world. There has to be divine intervention. And what is that? He says, Jivere Kṛṣṇa Koila, Kṛṣṇa Veda Puran. That's one of Krishna's incarnations, Veda Vyas, has written or spoken and passed down through disciplic succession the information by which one can be clear on the categories. Vedanti tattvavidas, tattvam yad jnanamadvayam. In the same section, Mahaprabhu then, on the same topic, Mahaprabhu says, Anarto pasanam sakshat bhakti yogam hoksaje lokasya ajanato vidman chakre sattvata samhitam. Very particularly mentions, does Mahaprabhu, in quoting from the Bhagavatam itself, that Srila Vyasadeva has given this Sāṅkhya, which is the cream of all the knowledge of the Vedas, because people don't know that they're in ignorance. Anarto pasanam sakshat bhakti yogam hoksaje, and they don't know that the remedy is the process of devotional service. And therefore, he's extensively presented the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam on the advice of his guru, Narada Muni, just so every person can have the opportunity to have direct access to Kṛṣṇa. Any other thoughts? Yes, Vishnu Ganaprabhu. We'll need to get a mic to him lickety-split because we got 4 seconds left before he gets off free.
Thank you, Prabhu. in 1976 in New York, Srila Prabhupada was interviewed by a reporter from Newsday. It's kind of a famous interview, and he was asking all kinds of questions. And then at a certain point, he asked, well, how do you know who to make a temple president? You remember this?
No.
And then one devotee said, well, he interrupted. He didn't have Prabhupada answer, but he interrupted. He said, well, our philosophy is Krishna is the intelligence, and he gives the intelligence to his devotee to make the choice, who should be, temple president, etc. And then Srila Prabhupada interrupted. He said, no. Krishna tells me. Krishna tells me. So, that's a little shocking that, along with this information, sometimes I think that Krishna's telling me, but a lot of times I'm wrong. So how can I, those 2 points I wanted to ask about, if you could clarify something.
Well, first of all, I doubt the premise. I doubt that you're wrong because of the way you've lived your life. You can hardly say you're wrong because you've drawn the ultimate conclusion, yomam eva masammudo janati purushottama, and you're living in resonance with Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad-gītā. But our standard process is to triangulate by Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And when we're chaste about accepting information from proper sources and vetting it, as we were talking yesterday in our ride to the Gambhira, although we thought we were going to Sarvabhauma's house, whichever, it was all equally blissful. Being meticulous about accepting information from the right source, Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. If you get some information, well, maybe you get a Prabhupada said, and if you ever had one of those and then you lived in, or connected yourself in a certain way for 20 years and then Shruti Kirti said, no, he never said that. Or whatever. And then, of course, we have the Bhagavad-gītā, we have the Shastra, we have Sadhu, and we have our Guru. And if we're careful to hear and conduct ourselves according to their directions, then we'll be properly directed. And if we feel some inspiration from Super Soul, it's not that hard to compare it to what Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gītā, or what Prabhupada has commentated on in the Bhagavad-gītā about certain topics, to come to that conclusion. So as far as I'm concerned, you're a walking Bhagavad-gītā or Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Sorry to break it to you, but okay. Sadhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I had a question. In the purport of the verse Vadanti tat tattva vidas, it said that Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively the same. But in the invocation of the Ishopanishad, we read that Brahman is the Sat feature of the Lord, Paramatma is Sat Chit, and Bhagavan is Satchidananda Vigraha. So how can we understand that Brahman,
Does the purport say exactly that they're qualitatively the same?
Yeah, it says Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. The purport of Vadanti tat tattva says Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively the same.
In one sense, everything's the same because it's Advaita. It's one non-dual thing. It's Kṛṣṇa. So everything you can trace back. If you look at a mango tree, there's the bark of the tree, there's the roots of the tree, then there's the flowers, and there's the mango fruit. And in one way, they're the same because they're all the same tree. But then there are different features of the tree. You might prefer to eat the mango than to eat the bark. Am I right on that? You might, through some DNA sampling, find the same idea, information within the mango fruit and the mango bark, but our experience of them is different. So the idea is that look up the word quality. It comes from qual, which means, has some sense of, somebody look it up, what the word quality means. 3, 2, 1, expound. Slow internet. What do we got? The standard of something as measured against other things of a similar kind, a degree of excellence of something. Use the mic.
A distinctive attribute or characteristics possessed by someone or something.
Okay, etymology. Go back further. Where does it come from?
Okay.
Here, pass the mic up. Straight. Latin qualis. Okay, go ahead.
Qualitatum, a quality, property, nature, state, or condition.
Qualis, Latin.
Qualis, Latin, what kind of a?
What?
What kind of a, from pi root KWO, quo, a stem of relative and interrogative pronouns.
Keep that in mind. Quo means what? Take the mic. We want to hear you expound on this word.
I actually don't know Latin, but I know that quo...
That surprises me, actually.
Quo is it's a question, like what? You know, like and in fact in Sanskrit, qua, right? Like quachit means what thing, or qua bhadram ishvara qua. So quo means it's a question. What? Asking what? So that's where
what is it? What kind of thing is it?
What kind of thing?
What category of energy is it? And so Advaya Gyan Tattva, so that in the description of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's one thing. And therefore it has one quality. It's defined as one. But there are varieties within that. And you can trace them all back to Kṛṣṇa. Kṛṣṇa gives examples of this when he talks about his opulences. Punyo ganda prativyam cha tejas chasmi vibhavaso jivanam sarvabhuteshu tapas chasmi tapasvishu. Those are his energies he's talking about, but he's saying, oh, those are me. That quality, you know that smell when it just rains after a long time? Do you like that? That's Kṛṣṇa. And when you're very thirsty and you need to quench your thirst and you drink some nice water, do you like that? Then you like Kṛṣṇa, because rasoham apsukonteya. So it has, Krishna's qualities are everywhere because he is everything. And you can trace it all back to Kṛṣṇa, but at the same time, achinta bhed abhed tattva, it's one tattva, it's one thing. What is it? It's one thing, but it has varieties within it. And according to your perspective, you may perceive those categories. And yoga is a way of refining your perspective. Bhakti yoga is bringing your perspective to the point of appreciating Bhagavan, the source of all of the energies. Okay, we have time for a couple more. Yes. Mic to aisle 2.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. I have a question about intelligence. I think I understand that the mind is colored by our impressions and our experiences. I have a question about intelligence. Is our intelligence also impacted by what we take in? Is it pure? And then is it something that we access, or is it something that we grow and we build upon?
It's an apparatus. Look up apparatus. It's an instrument. And as Kṛṣṇa mentions, the elements of the world, it's an element. Bhumir, ahu, anālovayu, kam, mano, buddhir, there it is, evacha. So there's ahaṅkāra, I'm sorry. There are these elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. And each one of them has a function as an instrument. The mind is in the mode of, born of the mode of goodness. That's a Sāṅkhya topic about how everything expands from subtle to gross, but the mind is in the mode of goodness. The intelligence is generated from rajas, from passion, because it's making discrimination, vivek. And there's a hierarchy. Indriyani prayanyahur indriyebhya param manaha manasastu para buddhir yo buddhe paratastasa. Lowest of all are the senses. Above the senses is the mind. Above the mind is the buddhi, the intelligence. And above the intelligence is the soul proper. And then, of course, there's the super self above all of them. And so we have that, and it can be contaminated. That's one of the topics Kṛṣṇa is discussing with Arjuna at the end of the third chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā, where he says this rajoguna, which is characterized by passion, lust, it can infiltrate the mind. It can infiltrate the senses. He gives this metaphor of a battle, as if there's a battle, an army coming in to attack us. And Rajas is representative of that, of those soldiers who come in and they can conquer the senses. So our senses become overwhelmed or influenced by the lower modes of nature. And then the mind can also become affected. And then, as Prabhupada comments in his purport there, very dangerously, the intelligence can also be affected. After all, the intelligence is a very subtle, fine instrument, better than ChatGPT, which I've become disillusioned with because it gave me a couple wrong answers. And I'm convinced this whole thing is going to blow up because of that. It said, he gave me wrong answers. Anyway, I'm just saying. I was excited for about a day or two. And now I'm like... Anyway, if the intelligence becomes affected, you can see that society, people use this fine instrument to figure out different combinations of sense gratification. And so Prabhupada said it's very dangerous when the enemy attacks the intelligence, because he says it's the next door neighbor to the soul. It's the closest thing to the soul. And therefore he says, evaṁ buddhi param buddhvasam stabhyatmanam jahi shatram mahā-bāho kāma-rūpam durasadam. First of all, he says to Arjuna, fortify your intelligence. And Kṛṣṇa says in the Bhagavad-gītā, practical matter, that by studying this dialogue, the Bhagavad-gītā, which is the Vedic intelligence, we just heard, he said that this is, you worship me by your intelligence. And if you read Bhagavad-gītā every day, then your intelligence can be purged of the lower modes of material nature. And obviously, by hearing Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, then you come to tadā, rajas-tamo-bhāvāḥ, kāma-lobhādayaś, ceta, etair, anāviddhaṁ, sthitaṁ, sattve, prasīdati. This also indicates the diminishment of the lower modes of material nature in the mind and the intellect by hearing. So it is an instrument. It's you're accompanied by that when you leave the present physical body. You have a present physical body, but it's just like if you're standing on a bridge looking at your smartphone and you drop it off the bridge into the ravine, you're not that upset because you backed it all up. And all you have to do is just go get a new hardware. You just buy a new one and it's already there in the cloud. So the buddhi, the manas, the buddhi, and ahaṅkāra, these are the three elements of what Patañjali Muni calls the ceta. We say ceto-darpana-mārjanam. It's actually three elements or three instruments in one, which sometimes we just say the mind. Western science doesn't really distinguish that much between the mind and the intellect, but there is a difference according to Sāṅkhya philosophy. Each one has a different function. As described, you can read about it in the Third Canto of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Kapila-deva teaching Devahūti. And therefore, Kṛṣṇa says, purify it, fortify it. He's saying it, again, it's a military statement almost. Evaṁ buddhi param buddhva samstabhyatmana. Jahi shatram, stand up and fight, Arjuna, make your intelligence strong. Don't get faked out by all the misinformation that comes into the senses from information affected by the lower modes of nature. And you can do that by reading Bhagavad-gītā every day. Does that sound like a good idea? Yeah. Okay, last one.
Prabhu, in that purport from the second canto, the last part, Prabhupada summarizes it so nicely. So if we continue with determination and pray for the mercy of the director of the intelligence, so is the super soul, then all the Vedic purports are revealed to us. So that's a practical aspect which can be applied on a daily basis.
It is, and it's very much indicated. There's sort of a emblematic verse that summarizes this idea. Samoham sarvabhuteshu nami dvesho stinapriya ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya maite teshu chapyaham. This verse, which most of you know probably, describes how Krishna's relationship with the soul in the material world. He says, I'm equal because the soul's not really interested in me. It's just he's acting as an order supplier. Whatever you want, I supply. Saparigatshukram kāma-lobhādayaś asnaviram shuram apapa-vidam kavir manushi paribu swayambur yatat yatator tam vyaradaśasvatibhya samabhyaha. He said, I'm just fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial. And then there's a turning point when one applies oneself to devotional service. Ye bhajanti tumam bhaktya. Our acharyas say the second half of the verse is categorically different, because now when you turn your attention to Kṛṣṇa and bhajanti, you want to worship him, the relationship changes. And you're like, oh, you're interested in me? And I'm already interested in you. And now you're in me and I'm in you, and we are all together. You'd have to be from the 70s to get that one. So, yeah. Okay, last one from Akadesha Vrat, then we got to... Apparatus, you got it? Okay, give her the mic.
A set of equipment or tools or a machine that is used for a particular purpose.
Yeah. So if you think of your physical, mental bodies, you have two of them, two layers, two distinct bodies, then it's helpful to remember that they're there for a purpose. And then sarvopadi vinirmuktam vina nirmalam. If you engage them, you use your senses, your mind, your intelligence, your ego, your bodily senses in service, then they'll become purified of that, of the lower modes of material nature. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Panchatattva, Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadraji, if you so desire, please empower us to become aware of you at every moment and offer our worshipful service at your lotus feet, especially by chanting Hare Krishna and spreading the Sankirtan movement. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part. Please unmute and say Hare Krishna.